In this nugget, you and I get to define and demonstrate how simple it is to log into and out of a virtual machine using the Horizon View client. Let's jump in. In the big picture with Horizon View, the client aspect is close to the carbon-based life form, the human. For example, we have Bob and Lois. And for clients, they could either be running a full Horizon View client for Windows, or if they happen to be on Macintosh, they could have a software client for Horizon View for the Mac. And what they would do is install this software or have that software installed on their computers and then use it to connect over to the connection server. Then based on what they're entitled to use, they could go ahead and use one of the resources that's running as a virtual machine. So our connection server is going to act as a broker, a go-between, if you will, between the user who wants the resources and the VMs that exist. And once that relationship has been established, for example, between Lois and a virtual machine that she's entitled to use, the connection server does not have to stand in the way. It can go ahead and let those two entities talk directly to each other. The client portion running on Lois's computer and the Horizon agent running at the VM. Now, in addition to Windows and Mac clients, there's also thin and zero clients. For example, a thin client would be a very stripped down version of maybe, for example, Linux that just has the ability to communicate using PC over IP, which allows our users to get to their VMs, or a zero client where it's all done in firmware. It's just a box, we plug in a monitor, a keyboard, a mouse, and the software that allows PC over IP is all built into that firmware. And there's also clients for Linux, Apple's iOS, Android, as well as HTML access. And regarding HTML, specifically it uses HTML5. So if you're at a device that speaks HTML5, that is yet an additional client option that we could use to connect to a virtual machine with Horizon View. Now, one of the challenges might be, where do we get this client if we don't have it? Well, the good news is, if we simply connect to the IP address of the connection server, that will provide us the links that we need to download, and then we can then subsequently install the client software on our computer. And then, once the Horizon View client is installed, we simply go ahead and launch it, which connects us over to the connection server, and then from there, we can select resource pools for which we're entitled to use. So as a demonstration of what we're about to do, we're going to log on to Lois's local computer. We're going to connect over using a browser to the connection server where we can select the client that we want to use and then be provided with the download to download that software directly from VMware. So here on Lois's computer, and we'll use this like purple lavenderish color for Lois's desktop. This is at her computer that she's directly connected to, she's sitting at. And let's launch a browser. Now, this browser at the moment, the default homepage is Google, which is fine. And what we're going to do is we're going to connect over to cs-1.nuglab.com. And that is our connection server, which is at 192.168.1.115. Now, because the connection server is using a self-signed certificate, our browser is having a little bit of a challenge saying, hey, you know what? I can't validate this certificate. Do you want to continue? And generally speaking, as a general practice, we would not want our users to continue. That's why we would want to install a CA signed certificate on the connection server, and that way our users, when they connect, wouldn't get a warning message and could have the benefits that SSL/TLS brings to the table with an HTTPS connection. So in this case, because I know it is the connection server with a self-signed certificate, I'm going to say continue to this website, and then I have two choices: install the VMware Horizon client, or I can use VMware Horizon HTML access. Now, at the moment, the pools that we set up on the connection server don't have HTML enabled. So for now, we'll leave the HTML option alone, and let's say we want to install the VMware Horizon client. So we click on that link, and that takes us out to VMware's site, where we can now download the appropriate client. So if we scroll down the list, they've got some for Windows, 32-bit and 64-bit flavors. They've got clients for Linux, clients for iOS, clients for Android. And for the iOS and Android, we'd get those, for example, from the Google Play Store or from the App Store. And those are traditional and familiar ways to install apps on those mobile devices. So in our topology, Lois's computer is running Windows 8.1 Enterprise Edition. So we click on the download link for that. It gives us then the option to download that specific flavor of the client. So we'll click on download, and I'll click on save, and then I'll go ahead and save it in our downloads folder for Lois. Then if we go to that folder location, the downloads folder, we can double click on the Horizon client to install it. So we'll click on run. It says, Keith, I'm sorry, but Lois, who you're currently logged in as, doesn't have administrative privileges on this computer. And the install is pretty straightforward. You click on OK a few times. You also point to the connection server that you're going to be using as part of Horizon View. Now on this computer, I've already installed the Horizon View client, and here's a shortcut for it right here. So imagining that you and I are Lois for the time being with this beautiful lavender background color, let's go ahead and double click on the Horizon View Client shortcut here on the desktop. Now, before you and I click on this cloud icon, which will then show us any pools of resources that we've been entitled to, let's also take a look at some additional options, including this guy right here. If we use this drop down in the upper right hand corner, there's an option for help, support information about this version of the Horizon View Client. We also have the option of configuring SSL. For example, if we click on Configure SSL, we have the option of never connect to untrusted servers, or warn before connecting, or hey, don't even bother warning me about connecting to an untrusted server. For example, a connection server that has a self-signed certificate that we cannot validate. So in a lab environment, we can go ahead and click on this Do Not Verify Server Identity Certificates. But in a production environment, it'd be more likely we'd want to say never connect to untrusted servers. And in addition, we'd want to make sure we have a CA signed certificate on our connection server as well as on our vCenter server, so we can have reliable, verified connections to all of our VMware related devices that we're connecting to with HTTPS. So for the demo, I'm going to say please do not bother verifying identity certificates. I'll click on OK. As we go back to our options here, we also can specify that we want to log on as the current user. Now at the moment, with this lavender background, we've logged in as Lois to the nuglab.local domain. So to enable that, we'd simply click it and that would put a checkbox right here next to it. So if we have that there, the user doesn't have to authenticate a second time at the connection server. If we take that checkbox off, the user would then have to provide their credentials. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it off for a moment. That way we can see the user who's logging on to the connection server manually every time. So let's see what pools we've been entitled to on the connection server called CS-1. We'll do that by double clicking on the icon for CS-1. And now, because we told it not to log on as our current user, it's now asking us for our credentials. So we're Lois for the time being at nuglab.local, and we'll put in Lois's password. And then we'll click on Login. Now what we're expecting to see are any pools that are set up on the connection server which Lois is entitled to have access to. So if we had 10 different pools and Lois was only entitled based on her group membership for 1 or 2 of them, only those 1 or 2 pools would show up here as resources available to Lois. Then next, for Lois to connect to a virtual machine associated with one of these pools, all she needs to do is simply double click on one of those pools. Now, before we do that, before we connect Lois over to a virtual machine using the connection server as a broker, if you will, between the client and the agent running on the VM, let's take a peek over at the Horizon View Administrator and see what it looks like before a user connects, and then we can compare what it looks like after they connect. So here in Horizon View Administrator, let's do a quick check of our pools by going under Catalog to Desktop Pools. So here we have our 2 pools. We have one called Engineering Pool and one called Sales Pool. They both have entitlements. And then on the inventory pane on the left-hand side under Resources, if we click on Machines, that gives us a nice bird's eye view of the virtual machines that are available through Horizon View, as well as which pools those VMs belong to. So VMs number 22 and 23 are part of the Engineering Pool, while VMs 26 and 27 are associated with the Sales Pool. Also notice how there is no user associated with any of these virtual machines yet, and that's because no users have connected to any of these virtual machines yet. Because in these manual pools we said automatic assignment, when Lois does connect to a resource in one of these pools, it'll automatically associate her name with that virtual machine that's part of that manual pool. Also over on the far right, this is really important, the status of those virtual machines. They all at the moment say available. That's a good sign. That means the agent running on those VMs has reported in and is willing to accept connections. If the status said something else, such as provisioning or customizing, that means that that machine, that virtual machine, is not quite ready, not available for an incoming connection from a customer. So in our case, all 4 virtual machines, 2 in the engineering pool and 2 in the sales pool, are all ready and willing to accept connections. So with that in mind, let's go back to Lois's Lavender desktop and let's initiate a connection to a resource that's in the pool called Engineering Pool. And I take it back. I'm so excited to connect, I can hardly stand it. Before we, click on the engineering pool and go to a resource in that pool, let me also share with you a couple of these icons that are right here in the Horizon client. So we've already authenticated. If we go over here to Settings, this little gear icon right here, and click on it, we can specify how we want to connect. Do we want to use PC over IP or Microsoft's RDP? And the reason those options are available is that because in this pool, we said the user can go ahead and choose. However, in that pool, if we had said PC over IP and the user can't choose, then the user would not have the options here. There's also an option for display to indicate how big do you want this desktop to be presented to the customer. If they want it small, they can select small. Also, after that desktop is delivered to them, they can also resize the size of that desktop once it's presented to them. So for our demonstration, let's go ahead and use small. And that way, you and I can see the original desktop with this beautiful lavender or purple background that's at the computer that Lois is sitting at, and we can compare and contrast that against the virtual desktop that's being served up by Horizon View. And while we're here, let's also specify for the sales pool that we want to use a small window as well for any resources that we get from the sales pool. So we'll click on OK. And now let's go ahead and double click on the engineering pool to be connected to one of the VMs available as part of that pool. So we'll double click on engineering pool, and the connection server is preparing the desktop, and now it has connected Lois over to that virtual machine. So let's minimize the Horizon client just for a moment. This purple represents the computer that Lois is sitting at, and this window right here represents the virtual machine that Lois is connected to. And regarding this virtual machine, it's a member of the engineering pool. If we go to options, we have the option to switch to other desktop. So if you had multiple desktops open, you could switch back and forth. There's options to help with the mouse responsiveness. For example, if you're using a gaming application and the mouse wasn't responding quite as you wanted it to, you could try using the relative mouse to see if that improves performance for that mouse activity. We could send a Control-Alt-Delete. We could do a reset of the desktop. And that's because in the pool that we created for engineering, we said the user has the ability to reboot the computer. And that's why this option of reset is here. Then we have the option of disconnect as well as disconnect and log off. So if the user selects disconnect right here, the virtual machine is still running and is still waiting for Lois to come back. And then we set a setting on the pool to go ahead and automatically log off 5 minutes after the user disconnects. Or if Lois is really done, she can go ahead and use disconnect and log off. As a quick demonstration of that, let's go ahead and launch Calculator on this virtual machine that she's connected to. So I clicked on the Windows button. We'll launch Calculator in the virtual machine. And let's go ahead and put in a number like 6783. So there's the calculator. And then Lois decides, you know what, I need to go ahead and quit this desktop for a moment. She goes to options and she says disconnect, but not disconnect and log off. So based on our settings for the pool, she has 5 minutes to reconnect. And if she reconnects within that 5 minutes, basically her computer, the virtual machine, is just sitting there waiting for her, like a dog on stay. You know, stay, stay. And then the dog sits there, I'm waiting. Well, this dog will wait for 5 minutes. So if we go back to the Horizon View client and we go back to the engineering pool, it's going to automatically take her back directly to that same virtual machine, and Calculator is still running. Now, I also want to share with you what that looks like in Horizon View Administrator when a user is connected to a VM that's part of a pool. So here in View Administrator, as we look at these machines, or under Inventory, Resources, and Machines, it shows us that all these machines are still available. And that's because we haven't used the magic refresh button to get the latest and greatest information shown on this pane. So now it shows that VM number 23 is currently connected. It also has a user of Lois associated with it. And because we're using the automatic assignment, even after Lois logs off, Horizon View is going to remember this virtual machine as belonging to Lois. So she'll always come back to this same virtual machine as long as she connects to the same pool. So back at Lois's computer, if we use the option of disconnect and log off, it's going to go ahead and not only disconnect Lois from that virtual machine, it's also going to log her off of that virtual machine. So now that she's logged off, let's go take a look once again at Horizon View Administrator to see the results. So here in Horizon View Administrator, once again, we will click on the refresh icon. And now it shows that that machine, VM number 23, is available. And it still shows Lois as the user associated with that virtual machine. Now, administratively, if we want to manually assign a user to a virtual machine, or if we want to remove a user from being assigned to a virtual machine, it's really easy to do. We simply right-click on that user, and then from the drop-down, we could say unassign user, and that would remove Lois's association with that virtual machine. In this nugget, we've identified and demonstrated that connecting to and logging into and out of a virtual machine is a snap when we use the Horizon View client in a Horizon View infrastructure. I had a lot of fun in this nugget. I'm glad that you joined me for it. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.